Hi everyone. So I'm nudging myself to get on and just talk a little bit about, a couple things. So first I'm just gonna get my breath in. You're more than welcome to breathe with me for a minute to just kind of settle ourselves into the energy. Remember, that's how we get information in, is through our breath. That's the gold in our breathing, something that we don't even have to try to do. That is the gift, the unknown gift to so many. Okay, we're just gonna clear that. And I want you to think about it in terms of practicing as a therapist for so many years, and struggling with anxiety myself, but many, anxiety is not an uncommon experience. Let's just call it an experience. Let's not call it a diagnosis or a mental health concern, I guess you can if you want to, but I really want to get away from that. Let me turn this down. Because I think about all the diagnosing that I did throughout all the years. The only reason I did it was so insurance could pay. It was solely a financial gain. That's it. Because really, diagnoses are just like outlines. And for some, if you want a name for something, it can be liberating. But for many, stamping a name on particularly a mental health concern can be oppressing. It can produce anxiety. It can produce all sorts of things. So the idea of what anxiousness feels like, it comes from many different places and it serves many different purposes. It's not something that you're just plagued with, or it's just a terrible happening. Now, I used to have panic attacks. So panic attacks are a different layer, a different level of anxiety. So I don't want to for 1 second pretend that it is not disturbing. It is a very disturbing experience, especially if it's aligned with disassociation. And if you're not familiar with that lingo, disassociation is basically you get into this experience of something that is upsetting you. Typically, it's anchoring in your fear. Now, if you're someone that fights when you're in fear, well, then it will be very intense and very bright. If you're someone that flees when you're in fear, it will be very intense and very bright from the inside. So that's how I didn't explain that. Let me try that again. If you're someone that fights in a moment, you will see that produce on the outside of you. You'll become quite hostile. You'll become maybe explosive. You'll not know how to manage yourself or control yourself, or I don't want to say control either. It will just be a disaster on the outside. If you're someone that internalizes anxiety or fear, then you will see a major shutdown, isolation, a darkness, a collapsing in. But I'm bringing that up because disassociation happens both ways. And basically disassociation is like you feel like you're here, but you're not here. You're not really you. You feel kind of outside of yourself, or like you feel like you don't really have any recall in the moment. And that is basically your consciousness, your psyche, separating from your physical experience to help you adjust to whatever it is that's going on. Now, if you don't have skills that are very helpful in that moment, that adjustment can actually feel like the worst thing that could happen. So Okay, so you know what, here, I want to stop for a second. I want to organize my thoughts because I was wanting to talk a little bit about intuition because I have some fellow peoples on Facebook that is coming up quite a bit for just wanting to talk with I'm getting a bunch of messages in for myself, so let me just try to organize and sort through these for a second, because really what is being asked of me is to talk about anxiety right now. Okay, so let's try this. There is a huge shift that's happening. The Lion's Gate has opened up. Now, it is said to peak on 8/8, which I connect with that number. But it's very intense. And so for many people, it's likely, and it'll go until anywhere from the 12th to the 18th. It really is a flexible gate, and it goes accordance to your blueprint. But it's bringing forth a lot of very intense energy because it's wanting those of us that are ready to release all the charred aftermath. And I think I spoke a little bit about it last week where the residue that's left over, that's been there for a long time, is needing to be scraped off. So many people are experiencing extreme bursts of energy or extreme that maybe is not even like centered in what they're doing. So it makes it even more upsetting because you're like, what the hell do I feel this for? Where did this come from? And it's just your body that's trying to release this. So let's talk a little bit about what may be helpful to get you through that, okay? The first thing is to try not to place too much value on it and just accept it as an experience that you are having in that very moment. The more you begin to attach things onto it, the longer it anchors in and it will stick around, okay? Secondly, another important thing when you first start noticing that you're experiencing this emotion, this intensity, is to remind yourself that you're safe. You're safe. The out of control response is because your body is telling you that you're not safe. And that's why it's separating. That's why the psyche is separating from the physical body experience, because it feels like it's not safe. It's a trick of the mind, but it's there for preservation. It's a very, very old response. It wasn't a response in a time that there was a lot of danger for like food gathering and just for like for normal living, because it lived more in the wild. There was more unpredictability. And that's not to say that there's not unpredictability today and violence today and all sorts of things, but it's a different kind. It's a different kind. So it was a fight or flight. It was adrenaline rush. It was a button in the pituitary gland that got pushed automatically from our soul, from our ego, our humanness, to say, do something in this moment to get yourself out of this situation. Now, we don't have a lot of situations that we're in that type of experience, but we do have a lot of triggering situations that are triggering our mind to believe certain things that for the most part are not true. They're programmed, and that's a whole nother story, but let's just stop there with it. So it's activating that part of the brain, and that is the response that's taking off. Now, some of us are more sensitive than others. And that may come from, being an empath. That may come from maybe you've had a pretty traumatic upbringing. Maybe that could be from maybe that you were in the military and you fought in war situations. Maybe you came from a domestic abuse situation. Maybe you were part of a natural disaster that was very traumatic. I mean, there's many things that can happen that can make someone but encourage someone to be more sensitive to triggers that are around. And again, the earth is triggering this, and it's triggering this to release it, to release the fear, because fear is an illusion. It's a program in our mind that says we're not okay, so fight or flee. And that is what we don't want to do. We want to stand in our power, stand in our find calmness, find ground, assure ourselves that we are okay, that we can do this, that we're not helpless, that we don't have to rely on other to provide us safety. Now, sometimes that helps, particularly when you're learning how to manage your anxiety. It may help to be around things that make you feel safer. But eventually you want to get to a point that you recognize that you are your safety zone. You. So when you are experiencing that anxiety, breathing is the number one thing that you can do. Because if you think about it, when we get worked up, hyperventilation is what happens. And so breathing helps us recenter that. And, you know, there's all sorts of names that are for it, you know, yoga, meditation, but it's really just breath work. It's just breathing. It's just realigning your breath to calm you down, your autoimmune system down, so then you can begin to think in a more strategic way and ask yourself, what can you do in this moment? Why you might be experiencing this, so you can then move that aside and remind yourself that you're in the now moment. Because that's the other thing with anxiety. Anxiety, panic is related to the past or the future, and it's going to be incredibly important to get into the now. This is the now. So here, let me give you an example. So I used to get anxiety when I was driving, okay? And so it was a tiered release of that fear. But initially, when I first started working on it, I used to remind myself to breathe, because I would feel like I was going to pass out, hyperventilate, and then get into a car crash. And I would physically feel that. I would feel that. So I don't want to make anyone believe that you're just, oh, this is nothing. No, you have to honor whatever your body is saying to you or telling you. But I would remind myself that I can manage my breath. I can calm it down. There are techniques for that. And if I felt unsafe in the other two lanes, I could go to the nearest, closest lane to the curb, so I could quickly pull over if I started to feel dizzy. I would initially I would avoid highways, but that actually kind of made it worse. When you avoid something that works you up, it just prolongs your suffering. But initially you might want to try that. But when you do, I would remind myself that I can drive slower. Like, I do not have to drive, the fastest of the speed limit. There were things I would provide myself with safety nets that I was managing. So that's empowering me. I'm showing myself that I can do things that can help me. I don't have to either A, fall apart, or spaz out, or I don't have to rely on other people to manage me. Because that's the other thing that has happened, particularly in settings where we find ourselves in trouble due to our panic, anxiety, because, chemicals play into that, crime play into that, violence plays into that. And then typically when that happens, there's some intervention that then the law gets involved in some way, and then others control you. And you can see that how disempowering that is, how that's just a really bad scenario. That doesn't work very well. And it just perpetuates the problem. If anything, it just makes it even worse. So, again, going back to anxiety and why it's here. If you want to work more consciously on the issue, the core issue, as it's popping up or even before it pops up, really take a peek at your life and look at what gets you worked up, what gets you going, and ask yourself, what can you do to resolve that does not rely on anyone else coming in and doing anything. It only relies on you managing it yourself. And if you get to a point that you think, oh, well, there's nothing that I can do, well, then I would suggest you go to someone that you trust and ask them the question. Ask them to help you come up with things that you can do that can help resolve, release, or at least get you through the moment better. Because there's always things that we can do. It's just that if things are really intense, we may not be able to see it so clearly, which is normal. Don't feel bad about that. You know, there are many times in my life that, you know, when I was in a really dark place, it was, even with all my training, I couldn't see some of the most simple things that I could do that could make my experience better. So taking the shame out of going to someone else and letting them see that you don't know what the hell to do, let them see you vulnerable. And if it's someone that you can trust, will make it easier, because those we trust have a 99% chance of caring about us, and then they're actually going to feel good about themselves because they're helping someone that they love or they care about. It's a win-win. And then you get some solid feedback that you can go and try to put into order. Now, just because it doesn't work the first couple of times doesn't mean that it's useless. It just might mean that maybe the suggestion is not where you're at. So let me give you an example of that. Like, if I'm having a significant panic attack, that is probably not the moment that I'm going to sit there and talk to myself in a very psychologically toned evaluation. Like be having a storyline and sorting through the difficulties. No, at that moment, it's important for me to just manage my symptoms, for me to get in there and try to help myself get through the moment better, because I know that I can't stop it. And the more I try to stop the anxiety, the worse it's going to get. That's how it works. Once that pituitary gland gets going, it's an automatic response that we have little to no control at that moment with. But the more I'm pushing it to stop, the more it will exaggerate it and prolong it. So it's important to figure out how I can tread that water in that moment. So that's an example of making sure that the skill or the tactic that you're using, the intervention that you're using, meets you where you're at. Don't try to meet yourself in a place that, you know what, that's not going to work. Or here's another thing. Just because a certain tool works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. We all have our own preferences. That's why, you know, some of the 80s psychology, pathology of looking in the mirror. And I would actually recommend looking in the mirror and falling in love with yourself. But that might not be where you're at. But this funny meme of it is like, I'm a beautiful person. I like myself and everyone else is going to. You know what? That doesn't really work for a lot of people when you're not feeling very good about where you're at. So it's about finding skills that will help you in that moment. And there's all sorts of, I mean, I don't know where this live stuff is going to take me and what my time limit is going to be, but I would love to teach dialectical behavioral therapy tools, just 20-minute segments of how to really help you get in at the consciousness and then align it with a practice of behavior that helps you in that moment. That is practical and it makes sense. And I know it's practical because I've been supporting this with some guys that, have the biggest struggles of all, that probably shouldn't have been able to learn these, but they did. Guys that are in prison for a very long time and are not very motivated by interpersonal relationships learned these skills and benefited and actually began to then seek out more interpersonal. It's reciprocal. I mean, that's how it works. So, excuse me. All right, I'll end it there. I won't talk about the intuition at all. Maybe then, I don't know. We'll see what I talk about the next time we get on. Who knows what I want to pull out for myself. I'm having a hard time figuring out what I want to pull up for myself in any given moment. Oh, the hummingbird and the condor. Okay, well, that makes sense then. What are you going to be? And I want us to not place any value on that, okay? Because the condor, the vulture, think about what the vulture does. Nothing goes to waste. And that's how the universe works too. And maybe it's important for you to be able to tear the pieces, what's not working for you, and then release it in that manner so it can be recycled. So you know what? Somebody else that needs to kind of tear some walls down themselves can use it. You know, the bad is not bad. It just doesn't really work so well when you're wanting to be on a different type of path or you're not in that place anymore. I mean, that's part of like releasing. Some people, we all do at different times in our life, hold on to things far too long. And it prevents us from being able to move forward, walk through another threshold. But the hummingbird, pollinating yourself, feeding yourself with nourishment. You know, the vulture eats what's dead. The hummingbird wants the nectar. It wants the fruits. And maybe you're in a place in your life that your container is ready to get filled. It's ready to be pollinated. And so that's what you move into. Where are you? Where are you in this process of change? When you're looking at your life and adjustment to what's happened over the last few years. Are you still in the process of breaking down some barriers, getting to a path that's more comfortable for you? Well, then maybe you're more in the condor vulture type of energy, tearing it down, getting out there, chopping wood. That's a vulture condor energy. But if you have found a path and maybe it's just you're trying to figure out how it's going to fit and you're experiencing it, you're looking around, you're figuring out where the flowers are at, or where you might want to plant some, the hummingbird might be where you're at. So it's important to call on your ethereal support. Now, whoever you call it, whether you call it angels, fairies, earth spirits, God, source, direction, elements, yourself, I would encourage you to call on yourself too. It will come and help you. The energy on the earth supports that now. It's very different than what it's ever been. And my hope, my goal is to help share that information with others that feel connected to me or like to watch what I put out. Light language helps fill those spaces that you really are having a hard time understanding with your psyche, your consciousness. So, all right. Well, I hope everyone has a beautiful day, and I will talk to you all soon.